see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy. And today I'm here with Matthew Winslow, who is an associate professor at Eastern Kentucky University in the psychology department. And thank you so much for joining me today to talk about how we can build a culture of empathy.
It's my pleasure. I'm very excited to talk about that topic.
Yeah, so I came across your work because you were giving a talk at the Chautauqua Institute on empathy. So it sounds like empathy is something that's important to you and you've been thinking about for a while.
It really is. I've been trying to research it for the last 5 or 6 years. I should correct you. I didn't give a talk at the Chautauqua Institute. That was actually at Eastern Kentucky University where I teach. But we have a Chautauqua lecture series that's called Chautauqua, but it's really just the one that we have at our own university.
Okay.
But empathy is an important thing for me, so I've been thinking about it for a while.
So what kind of got you started in thinking about empathy and starting this, 5 years, you said? 4 or 5 years? That's quite a while.
I guess I'm a social psychologist, so there's a bunch of research in social psychology about the power of empathy and perspective taking to do a lot of interesting things that I was sort of, really, I had a passing knowledge of, really. I didn't know too much about it, but I started seeing it kind of more places. It's good at making people more helpful. It's good at reducing aggression. It's good at reducing prejudice. And I started to think, wow, that's a lot of stuff. It seems very powerful for a relatively simple idea. I mean, there are kind of always other ways to get people to do all those things, but they're sort of more targeted for each different module, each different behavior. But here's this one thing that can do seemingly good stuff in lots of areas. And the thing that really stuck out to me was that a lot of the studies in my area are really, the manipulation is so simple. It's just a few sentences. Put yourself in this person's shoes or imagine you are this person. And with just a few sentences, it can get people to really change the way they act. And I thought, that's a lot of power for something so simple. And so I decided that I wanted to try and investigate that and see what I could learn about it, and if it could affect the other things that I'd already been thinking about, like prejudice. And so I started to do some research on it, and the thing that I did that helped me learn about it the most was to teach a class about it. I've got a colleague who's a clinical psychologist and is an autism expert, and I kind of went to her, and she's a good friend of mine, and I went to her and I said, look, I'm interested in empathy. Do you want to teach a class about this together? And she said, absolutely. So we've been teaching a class about it, a seminar class about it, for the last 5 years or so.
Is there kind of like an actual moment where you discovered the power of empathy, or was it like this gradual, step-by-step process?
It was more gradual, really. I mean, it kind of dawned on me after a while that this is a powerful thing, but I can't point to any one particular moment when it really dawned on me.
Yeah, it's kind of like that for me. I kind of wish there was like an inspirational moment because it makes for a good story. But for me, it's the same way. It's just like kind of, plodding along and slowly deepening that experience. And
yeah, I wish I had a good story about it, a good origin story, but I really don't. But my experience has really been, the more I talk about it with people, the more people in different areas come to me and say, oh, this is related to something that I just had an email from someone who saw my lecture. This is a woman that is really the wife of a professor that I know, and she's working on her graduate degree in literature, and she's studying George Eliot. And she had this huge, long email about how it's related to her dissertation, and do I want to get together with her and chat about it? And I thought, it's a great idea. Well, I hope to do it, but it's really that same story. Everyone I talk to about this is saying, oh, you should do it with this. These people need to do this, or this is related to this thing that I care about. And it really is, empathy is an idea that is really so far-reaching. It's encouraging to me that it is so far-reaching.
Yeah, it sounds like it has resonance with a lot of people in a lot of different fields and areas.
That's my experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, what we're kind of talking about is how do we build a culture of empathy. I'm really looking at how do we transform society from where we are now to, I call it create a culture of empathy, but it's basically to raise the level of empathy, that's within society. And sometimes I find it helpful to start with a metaphor of what empathy is. Like typically, we have the metaphor of standing in someone else's shoes and looking through someone else's eyes. But those metaphors are taken, right?
Yeah.
So for me, empathy is like a cornucopia because it kind of opens these doors to this richness of.
Okay.
And I'm wondering for you, do you have a metaphor of what empathy is like for you personally?
I think of it as, I guess in my younger days, I was an actor. I did some acting. And I really think that acting is a great metaphor. I mean, the role of an actor is to get inside the mind of their character that they're trying to portray. And so I really think of us as playing different roles in our everyday lives. I'm Matt as the professor. I'm Matt as the husband, the son, the friend. And so we're all really actors in different ways, but we don't think about it very often. We think about it, we just kind of go about it in a natural way. But I think of empathy as really trying to take on someone else's persona, trying to get inside their brains and figure out what their character is, what their character would see and think about. So I think of acting as sort of a metaphor for empathy.
So empathy.
I also think about it.
So empathy is like acting, being an actor.
In some ways, I'm not sure that's a great metaphor to tell lots of people about because I think people will think, well, I don't know how to be an actor. But that's the way I think about it.
Yeah, if it's what resonates now, maybe other ones will pop up too.
Yeah.
So if we, what would be the opposite of empathy then? And what would be a metaphor for that?
Boy, I mean, to me, the opposite, for me, the metaphor would be somehow being an actor and ignoring the audience. It's really a self-focus and not thinking about other people or being around you. People who are really not empathic to me are so self-focused, and they really are kind of caught up in their own world, and they can't see beyond their own boundaries and their own issues and their own biases. So I think really narcissism is the opposite of empathy. People who are really narcissistic. I'm not sure what a good metaphor is for that, but I guess acting in the dark or a one-person show with no audience and anything. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a narcissistic actor. Yeah,
that's right.
So then if we scale it up, if acting is empathy is like being an actor, what does a culture of empathy look like? Is it just scaling up everyone's an actor in this culture, or how does that kind of scale up?
I don't know. To me, I think it's pointing out to. I think people are actors already, and some people really know this and they really pick up on it and they act in a very conscious way, differently in different situations. But most people don't. But they still do act differently. So, in some of my classes, I really enjoy trying to make this point to my students. Hey, you really act differently in this class right now. Right now, you're all sitting there very calm and quiet. But I bet you don't act that way other places. Of course they don't. But they don't think, oh, I need to go and act a certain way. I mean, sometimes we do in a job interview, but a lot of times we just change the way we act in a very normal, very fluid and natural way. So I think maybe we just point out to people, hey, you are an actor in your everyday life. What we're trying to get you to do is not just act as your own character, but imagine how the other characters around you would act. Trying to think about what their character sees about what's happening. So, excuse me, in many ways, I think that empathy can seem like a very difficult task. You've got to really think about it and be deliberate about it. But I hope that's not always true. Actually, I hope that empathy, we can figure out a way for it to be a very natural thing, and that people will realize that they are doing it. They just need to maybe think about it more often in a conscious way. But I hope that it's not going to be a really hard thing for them to do. It's rather just a shifting of their attention. So you're an actor right now. You're acting right in this very moment. You're playing some role. But other people around you are playing a role just like you are. And imagine what their role is. It's a subtle shift, an important one, but I think hopefully a subtle one. I'm not sure if that makes any sense, but That's my answer right now.
Yeah, it's a culture of empathy is where people realize that they are actors. There's kind of like this realization that we all realize that we are actors, and that we have the capacity of acting different roles, and so that's
Hopefully that makes some sense.
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, it makes sense to me. So hopefully it
Good.
does to the people who are watching this.
Yeah.
So how do we get to that point? It's like here we are now. We're narcissistic actors, which means is we're totally into our own world. We don't realize that there's this whole other world out there. How do we transition from this world? And I mean, there's a whole scale along the way, but how do we kind of get more deeply into that acting?
Well, my answer, the thing that I'm working on right now is software. I'm trying to make a software, really an app for your phone or for your mobile device that will make people better empathizers, better perspective takers. So I'm trying to make it into a game so it will be sort of entertaining. So you might play it like you play Angry Birds while you're waiting for the dentist, or while you're just in line at this grocery store. Something that you could play quickly that would be entertaining but would make you a better perspective taker. So it's really based on many perspective taking and empathy tests that psychologists have developed, most of which are for children, people who are 3 or 4 or 5 years old. But my idea is if we can make them more challenging and increase the sort of time pressure on them so people think, I've got to do this quickly, it can be entertaining, but it can also get them to think in empathic ways and get them better at doing that. I think that we're all relatively good at doing it, but it's a skill that we can develop and we can get better at it. And so if we can make people, make it easier for them, make them more kind of habitual perspective takers, habitual empathizers, then I think that they're going to do it. I hope that they're going to do it just in their everyday life. They'll be more inclined to do it. It'll become easier to them. It's like, it's sort of like, learning, I don't know, arithmetic or algebra. It's hard to do it first, but as you get better at it, you find you can do it quickly and easily. And so, when you're trying to calculate your tip at the restaurant, it'll just come quickly because you've gotten so good at it. And I think that empathy can work the same way. If we can get people to be better at it, then when they see things happen in the world around them, where they might not take that person's perspective normally, they might just kick in, be like, well, I wonder what that person's thinking. Now, they cut me off in traffic, or they're being rude to me. Well, and first temptation is to really be cynical about it and denigrate them and get angry about it. But I wonder what it's like to be them. What are they seeing? How are they interpreting this thing? And if we can get people to be better empathizers, that process will happen quickly and easily, and it'll be more of a habit. I think I've found in the last 5 years that really not intentionally, but I've really trained myself to, I think, be a more habitual perspective taker. So when I see people do things, I don't always do it, but when I see people do things, I try to think, how are they interpreting this? What are they seeing? And I think that people can get better at it. So I think if we get people to be more habitual empathizers, people will just naturally do it. And in this culture of empathy will arise sort of at this grassroots level. And I like this approach because it's really a bottom-up thing. It's a grassroots thing. If we can get people to individually get better at it, we don't need to have big top-down, okay, here's the government going to say, or education, or I don't know what it is. Those things are great. I mean, I think we need those things too, those big kind of policy changes or big movers. Those are very helpful to have. But I think this up-from-the-bottom perspective-taking, grassroots approach hopefully can help people. And I really think that motivation is a big part of this too. I've got to convince people that this is not going to just be entertaining to play my little game, but it might actually help them in their workplace, in their relationships, in lots of ways that are going to be good for them personally. I think self-interest is a nice. If you can tap into that, that'll get people to want to do this for their own benefit, in addition to helping everyone else too. I mean, I think that it's much much nicer to be around people who are good empathizers. It's much more pleasant to interact with those people. But it's good for the empathizers too. They're going to benefit from it as well. Being able to figure out, why is my boss really mad at me? Or I can anticipate this is going to make my boss or my partner really mad at me, so maybe I shouldn't do that, or I do it a different way, or explain things a different way. So we convince people that it's going to be good for them, they might want to do it.
Well, it sounded like the first part was about you were wanting to create a game, so it's something like kind of tapping into that energy, like you say. I mean, games are huge, especially
Absolutely.
among, it's bigger than movies, actually.
That's right.
And people are just spending all that time, usually in kind of combative, shoot 'em up kind of, competition games. So you're looking to design a game that kind of helps people or engages people in the act of perspective taking and putting themselves in other people's shoes and other people's roles and making some kind of a fun experience out of that, so that you're slowly kind of sharpening and deepening those skills of being an actor.
That's exactly right. And there's actually a bunch of games. There's kind of a whole movement in game design that is kind of pro-social, positive games. They haven't had any real big hits yet that have really caught on a lot. But I know that there are game designers who are, I think they're sensitive about the evidence, really, that shows that playing a lot of violent games makes you more aggressive. So that's I think for them a bad publicity situation. So they want to try and do something to make themselves and their industry look better. I think that's good. And maybe we can harness that motivation to try and get them to do games that will be helpful to people. They'll make people better people, not worse. So I'm working on this software with a guy at my university who's a computer software professor, and he knows more about this whole movement in game design. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunity there, because as you say, people spend so many hours playing games. It's unbelievable. And if we can get them to just spend a small fraction of that time interacting with a game that's going to require them to be good perspective takers in order for them to succeed. I mean, my game is very rudimentary the way we have it designed now, but the games that are out there now are so complex. There's characters, there's backstory, there's a lot of emotions, and a lot of knowledge that you have to have. So they really could make games that would really draw upon people's ability to empathize in order to succeed in the game. And so if we can convince them to build that in, I think that might be an interesting game, also be good for people. And actually, I've played some games. I'm not a big gamer, but I played some, and I played some online. And as you say, most of it's sort of competitive, not sort of, very competitive, and very, I think, very negative. And there's a lot of negative emotions being reinforced there. But people also do work as teams online, people that they've never met before. They're working with other people that they only know online. But they have to work as a team to reach some goal, and I think that cooperative aspect, we could maybe harness that and build some empathy into that. And again, so in order to achieve this goal, you've got to work as a team and work together, and that might require some empathy. We could build that into it. I think that's a neat. Again, a neat way of reaching a lot of people. A lot of people are playing these games, as you say, and it's not just young kids. I mean, it's a lot of young kids, but I think I read someplace that the average age of people who play online games is in the 30s. So it's adults too.
So kind of one strategy is there's already these teams together, kind of like the military, right? So it's the military
Exactly.
wants to create cohesion and connection and motivation within the team and smooth functioning. And then hopefully if you can make it explicit that this is empathy, then it's like saying, well, how about expanding the empathy, to the whole society and really transforming the whole culture that way. So you start with kind of a small model and then kind of expand out from there. So.
I think that's a very attractive model. I think that's a really interesting way that this could develop. I'm not sure how to convince those software designers to spend some of their time and energy doing this. But again, it might be that if we can convince them that this will be good for their publicity and this will put their whole industry in a different light, they might be more interested in doing it.
Well, the other part of this is you're saying that you're coming out of the acting background, and I don't know how long you were doing acting, but from what my understanding of some of it that I've seen in the workshops, it's a lot about empathy training. I mean, there's all kinds of activities of not saying no, say yes, and kind of building, really hearing the person, mirroring, and so it's just full of techniques and processes for kind of deepening that empathy.
And again, I'm a very amateur actor, but my experience is that people who are amateur actors, young actors, often think that acting is really about them. But good actors know that it's about listening to the other person and responding to the other person. Even when you have a script, I mean, if you're doing impromptu stuff, then listening is incredibly important, and understanding and thinking about what the other person's thinking. But even when you have a script and you have lines you have to say, those lines don't mean anything unless you can think about how it's going to affect the other person and vice versa. So I really do think being a good actor, I mean, it'd be a great study to do research on professional actors and see what kind of empathy skills they have and compare them to non-actors. I mean, I think it'd be a really interesting study to do. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if they were really good at almost every level of empathy, from that mimicry thing you were talking about all the way up to, really imagining, complex emotions and reacting to people in very sensitive ways. They've got to be good at it. I mean, being a good actor just demands that stuff. So you're going to have to be good at that to be worth anything on stage or behind or in front of a camera.
Well, I put together a video of excerpts from Meryl Streep's speeches, and it's her talking about empathy, and it starts off by saying, "I've thought a lot about the power of empathy, and I've discovered it's like what's the essence? It's the core of the actor's skill." So I'll send you a link to that.
Oh, that sounds great. Oh, it's such an interesting thing. It'd be great for my class. I'd love to show.
Oh yeah. Oh, that would be great. So that would be. So I'm really excited about this whole. I didn't realize so much that you had the acting, background. So I'm really kind of excited to be kind of exploring this with you.
We actually, one of the articles we read in that class is really about the role or the task that actors have when they're trying to imagine, trying to analyze a script, looking for beats. But it's also so there's memorization of the words, but then there's understanding the emotions and the thoughts and the motivations of the actors. And so this article that we read for class is really about how that process is really empathic at its very core. So it's an interesting article.
Well, something I found interesting is I've taken mediation workshops and training. And in the training, there's, 2 disputants and then 2 mediators. And in the training, you take each position. You're given a script.
Interesting.
And it says there's you're a female with a young child, and there's a big tree branch hanging over your backyard. And you're afraid it's going to break and drop on your kid and kill him or something. And then you're the owner of the property. You don't have money, so you don't want to, chop off the branch. And then you kind of explain the situation, and then people just kind of fit into it, and then they start arguing.
Right.
And I am like so amazed at everybody's innate capacity to just automatically step into those imagined shoes of those people and take on those roles. It's like everybody can do it. It's amazing to me.
And the amazing thing to me is that people can do it even about things that they've never experienced. I mean, I don't have kids, but I can imagine if I did, it's not inconceivable. I've never had a tree hanging over my house, but I can imagine if it did. I mean, our imaginations are incredible things. So the cool thing about empathy for me is that, if I'm trying to empathize with, a migrant worker, I have nothing in common with them on the surface. In many ways, I have nothing in common with them. But I really think that with some work and with some more information, maybe I can really understand what their perspective might be about something. Our empathy is not just limited to the things that we've experienced. We can empathize about things we've never experienced or never will. I think it's a really cool part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, so we got a little cat showing up there.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, the other thing is that I noticed in your presentation that you gave, and I'll have a link to that too, is that you really focused on the testing part of it. Like, how do you test empathy? And you really had all these perspective-taking tests. So it seemed like to build a culture of empathy, you're kind of setting up a lot of these tests to get people to start thinking about it. And one way to do it is to test. Let's see, how good are you? You know, how do we kind of measure it? And and then if we do some exercises, you know, let's test again. Is it going to have and it gives you some insight.
I hope so. I mean, as a psychologist, I've just, you know, what I do is read research, and that's the only way I don't really know how to learn about something. So, you know, I'm just kind of been reading all these studies about it, and people have been studying psychology for a long time. So there's a lot to read. I mean, it's hard to get your hands around it. There's so much, but I really do think, I mean, my idea, and maybe I'm wrong, but my idea is that you got to start simple. You got to start at the basic level, and the basic level is really this kind of, you know, visual perspective taking, seeing things from literally a different angle on the same object, and that's why I want to start my software out at that level and build on that. So it's building blocks. You lay this foundation, and then you can get better. The reason I think that is because we think that's how humans work. I mean, we develop that first, and then we develop, and it happens really in an unconscious way. We don't train our kids to do this. They just do it on their own. But I think that if we can tap into that and say, you know, even as an adult, there's part of my brain that is really occupied doing those visual perspective-taking tasks. That exists. And if I can get us to focus on that and build on that, we can get to the point where, you know, I can imagine what it's like to be, you know, a mother or a migrant worker or president of the United States or anybody. And that's a very high level of empathy in understanding their emotions and their thoughts and their motivations. But I think to get there, we've got to start low. Now, maybe we'll find out that I don't need to start very low. I can actually start higher, but I want to start out that way at least.
Yeah, I kind of tried out just like nature has done it. We know that, I think it's at about 18 months that children can start knowing that when they look into a mirror to be able to see themselves. And until that point, they look at a mirror and it's like, they don't know what that is. It's just another being or something. But there's a point where there's a test for knowing that you are a separate being, and that's you right there.
Yeah.
And that seems to be like a kind of a dividing point in terms of the perspective taking, kind of starting at kind of this rudimentary level. And I've heard about studies, you know, like especially like Franz de Waal has done a lot of work around this.
Yeah.
Is, you know, in chimpanzee, there's certain animals that have this capacity for that perspective taking. Chimpanzees, elephants, dolphins, bonobos, and so forth. So that seems to be kind of the gateway to that perspective taking. And in terms of creating a curriculum, it seems like to learn that that step is very important. And you had like the Sally in the box test and some others like that that kind of tested for that.
Yep. I hope that's right. I mean, I think that it's just fascinating I mean, I love Franz de Waal's research. I think it's so interesting to find out about other animals and what they can and they can't do, what the limitations are. It just tells us so much about our own thinking. But I hope that, you know, we starting out at that basic level is the way to go. My fear is that it's going to be too boring. I mean, it's going to be too easy for people, and my little tasks are going to be so easy for them that they're going to get tired of it quickly. And so we're going to have to figure out, you know, how much can they play that before we move on to the next level and make it more complex, a different kind of task. That's kind of testing we have to do, and we're just starting. But I hope to get into that. And, you know, it'd be great if I found out that, you know, people's empathic abilities are so advanced that I really need to just jump ahead to, you know, much further, much more complex stuff. That'd be a great lesson to learn. I'd be happy to learn that, although it would kind of set me back a little bit, but that's okay. I'm happy to go where it takes me.
Well, I know from my own sense of clarity that understanding that has added a great deal of clarity, and it's put a lot of human experience into context. Because this really kind of ties into having an overall model of empathy and how it works. And so I guess we could maybe even talk a little bit about the definition of empathy. And I have a basic definition that, I've been looking at a lot of definitions and kind of put together a little bit of my own, I guess. It's a compilation of a lot of different definitions, but it's basically that there's in general, 4 parts to empathy. There's the first part, which is self-empathy. Okay. Which is mindfulness and self-awareness. It's like knowing what's going on inside my body. If I the quieter I am, the more I kind of just feel into my body, the more subtle differences, the little aches and pains, or the joy, or the fear, or the anxiety, or softness, or tough hardness, or so it's kind of having that awareness. And sometimes that's called, I've heard it in some traditions, self-empathy. Then as kind of the next step would be, now as you and I are looking at each other, I'm seeing you move, right? And within that movement, there's this mirrored empathy that, that I can kind of get into the rhythm of what you're doing and kind of start mirroring your actions. And, a baby might be kind of feeling that part, right? They don't, it's like, this is me. This is, they're feeling, and I even sense that when I'm with kids. Little kids, sometimes we're like a little nervous about how to deal with them. And it's almost as if they feel my nervousness and anxiety, and then they'll start crying. So it's just this, so that's the mirrored empathy based on mirror neurons. Then we go into perspective taking, which is what you're talking about.
Right.
Which is you identify yourself as a separate being, and that you have a different perspective, a different background, the historical, context. And then the fourth part being empathic action. And that is how we work together in kind of a harmonious fashion. And I've seen that through mediation, where people are really mad at each other, they're in conflict, and then you use empathy to bring them together. They kind of connect. They start seeing each other's humanities and what's really, real for the other person. And then it's like, well, how are we going to chop down that tree, right?
Yes.
It's like, how are we going to take action to create the new reality together? And it's like, well, we've been having these problems for a long time. Every week we'll get together for, a coffee or something.
Right.
I'll borrow the money and, chop the tree down, the branch. And so and when it happens in a smooth, fashion where everybody's feelings and needs and values have been heard, that's like this empathic action kind of component. So that's kind of just a framework that I've been kind of using. And I'm just wondering what your framework is, or how that resonates with you.
When I think of empathy, a lot of people think of empathy and they talk about it as being, they focus on more the reaction part of it, and they don't think about the thoughts part of it. I think the fourth part that you talked about is really important, the empathic behavior, doing things, responding to people in a thoughtful and caring way, or an appropriate way, whatever it is. I mean, that's sort of critical component, but a lot of times in my class, we have this discussion about, well, if I understand what you're thinking, but I don't respond to it for some reason, is that empathy? And a lot of our students will say, well, no, I don't think it is, because there's no action. But I still think that the understanding is a really important aspect to it. Trying to understand what you're thinking or feeling. And, we can feel empathy for people that, are on TV, or that, in the car next to us, that we might not even have an opportunity to behave towards or react to because they're separated from us in some way by technology or just logistical reasons. But so I'm much more focused, I guess, typically on people's thoughts. So my understanding what you're thinking, what you're feeling. Emotions are a big part of it too, but and then we oftentimes have discussions about people who are con artists. If I'm a con artist, I have to really understand your thinking and feeling and what your wants and desires are in order to manipulate you. So those people have a really finely honed sense of empathy in a certain way. Now their reactions are, I think, totally inappropriate and not helpful, and they're difficult for people to be around, and that's why we try to separate ourselves from those people as much as possible. But I really think those people have some empathic abilities that can be really impressive. They just don't act on them the right way, the way we want them to. So that distinction between thinking, and acting is a really important one, a really interesting one for me to think about. But I do want to go back to your first level, which I think I hadn't put it together like that until you just said it that way. I've just gotten a little bit into meditation and Buddhism, just dabbling a little bit about it. And I have a colleague actually who does some research about mindfulness training, and she's a clinical psychologist, so she's really interested in the kind of the stress reduction and anxiety and really the clinical aspects of it, the clinical uses of that. But I really do think, and just knowing that they really do a lot of compassion, meditation, but it's also, but it all seems, my experience is it all starts, just as you said, of just focusing inward and thinking about myself. And so I'm very interested and attracted to the connections between mindfulness, self-focus, and empathy, which I think on its surface seems like they're totally separate. Thinking about myself versus thinking about others. Like a narcissist thinks about themselves a lot, but not in the same way. And so I think that people don't spend enough time in that mindfulness state, thinking about how am I feeling right this second? What's going on with me right now? And it's been, I've had several times in my life when I've had that point made to me, either about myself or by other people. Stop, think about what's happening just inside you, and that to me it's like empathy. It's a moment of resonance that can last for a long time. So I think the connection between those two things, the kind of the inward focus and the empathy, there's a lot to explore there. I'm sure that you've and lots of other people have thought about it. Before I had that realization. So I want to learn more about what other people have thought and written about it. I'd be very interested in learning about that.
Yeah, so you're really wanting to explore and kind of keep deepening and learning about empathy.
Absolutely.
And, I mean, there's a lot of research, a lot of kind of going on around it. And
Yeah.
I'm kind of looking for kind of a unified field theory of empathy.
Yeah.
It's like that wholeness of empathy, because sometimes people think, well, it's just about the emotions, or it's just about the cognitive part. It's just maybe the action, but it seems to be there's kind of like a whole somehow, and how to kind of create a vision, a connection between those different components. And I think that it's interesting what you're saying about the mindfulness part, because there seems to be a lot of different ways of creating that connection with yourself. There's the mindfulness community, which has been doing, a lot of work
Sure.
around that. But there's also the acting, with actors, you can kind of act different parts of yourself, kind of like the different, that's what I like about the metaphor. It's like, we'll create a metaphor of this and a metaphor of that, and then have them be in dialogue within yourself.
That's right.
And so that's more the acting way of kind of being and connecting to yourself, different parts of yourself. And then there's the whole sensory awareness community, which is about really just feeling what's going on in your body as a kind of a felt sensation. So it's like how to, integrate all these different components. And, Franz de Waal has his model of empathy, which is the Russian doll model. I don't know if you've, which there's different layers on it. So we need to see that it's this whole.
That's right. I really think there's something to what you're saying. I really think someone's going to come up with that unified field theory about empathy. I don't know if it's going to be an artist or a scientist or a religious person. I don't know who's going to be able to do it in a way that, is satisfying and captures it and somehow. But there's just too many people that I talk to about empathy, and they say, "Oh, and they have some." There's a piece over here or a piece over there, and there's threads that just come together. And I really think that someone's got to weave it all together.
Yeah, I talked to Marco Iacoboni. Had done an interview with him. He did the book Mirroring People, so he's like one of the founder. Really done a lot of work around mirror neurons and empathy. Sure. And we were talking about this very topic, and he said, we need a scholar or someone to just bring it all together, that there's all these different parts, but they're not kind of fitting together yet in a really smooth and it's a harmonious way. And it's very important because Barack Obama said he was going to choose a Supreme Court justice, and one of the qualities was going to be empathy, and all hell broke loose in the Senate.
Yeah. Oh my God, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and then Jeff Sessions said, "What is empathy? What does this mean?" So. And then just recently, there's work at bringing empathy into the schools, and Phyllis Schlafly, she's a person who's kind of against ERA and all that, and she's saying we shouldn't have empathy in the schools because there's no scientific definition of it.
Oh boy!
So it's a very important thing to have a clear definition. And just a couple of days ago, I interviewed Dan Batson. Who's and we talked for about an hour and 15 minutes, going through his different 8 ways that empathy is actually used within society, and everybody's got different aspects. Like you're focused on the perspective taking. He doesn't consider the perspective taking, as the way he's using it and this. And but I think they're all part of that whole, and we have to find the way that they fit together into a whole.
Yeah, Dan Batson certainly was an inspiration for me. His work is very well. He's a big name in my field, so everyone knows who he is, and he certainly was part of my inspiration. But I also know that I don't have the same focus he does. But that's okay. I mean, but it's part of the same thing. I mean, it's they fit together somehow. I mean, and I think that his motivation and my motivation are probably the same, which is to try to use empathy to get people to be better. His focus is mostly on altruism, which is great. I mean, I'm very pro altruism, but it's just one aspect of making the world a better place, which I think is your motivation, my motivation, and his motivation too. So, and we're all, I think you're right. We're all talking around the same thing. We're all getting at the same idea. It's just how to put it all together. I don't know how to do that. Someone much smarter than me is gonna have to do that, I think.
Yeah. Well, I hope it'll be through these dialogues, because I'm even talking. Like Marco Iacoboni. I don't know if you're familiar with him. But he was saying the same thing, and so it's out there. There's a call if any scholar, any real person, I'm even thinking of having a whole series of panel discussions around this. Like, let's really delve into these different definitions and use the internet in these dialogues to start creating a more of a unified whole around this. How does mindfulness and all these different traditions and acting and conflict resolution and restorative justice fit into a unified whole that's really about creating a culture of empathy?
I think it's an incredible goal. I'm just, if I can help out at all, I'm willing. Just call my name if you think I can do anything for it, because that's such a great goal. I think that there's a lot of interesting things going on, kind of online. There are, TED Talks and what you're doing and blogging has, and the internet has so much potential. I mean, I know everyone says the same thing about it, and if we can tap into it, I think it's such a great thing. I hope you can do it. You're the guy to do it, so it's all on your shoulders.
Well, I'm quite thrilled to have met you, since it sounds like you have an actual class. It's a class that's actually on empathy. I mean, titled Empathy 101, or
it's called Empathy. That's what the class is called.
Oh, wow.
Now, it's a class that it's for seniors, undergraduates, so the kind of the last class before they graduate is a capstone course. But it's a class called Empathy, and I feel like we cover a lot of ground, but really it's almost entirely within just psychology. So there's just so much more outside of psychology that we can't even get to. It's such a huge topic, but I'm very excited to be involved in it. I love learning about it. I love thinking about it, and I love talking about it. So it's been great to be on.
Perhaps you could just give an outline of that class. I'm just curious if you have
Sure.
just the bullet points of what does that class cover.
It's a strange kind of class. It's a class that's we designed to cover every major topic in psychology. So biological and developmental and cognitive and clinical and social. So the broad perspectives in psychology, there's kind of a week about each one of those, and we read readings from, so what do developmental psychologists talk about empathy? What do cognitive psychologists talk about empathy? And so we read kind of original research about it, but it's from every different perspective in psychology. What do they say about empathy? What can they tell us about empathy? So we can kind of try to get at the end, maybe a big picture view of it. But again, it's only a big picture from psychology. I feel like we should teach this class, and have the whole university teach it somehow, or let's bring in the arts and the humanities and, technology and biology, the hard sciences. I mean, everyone's got something to say about it. It's hard to find someone who doesn't have something to say about the topic. So I would love to teach this class. Really what we need is to have a whole lecture series about just empathy on our campus. Now, the lecture series that I was part of, it was, in my mind, it was about empathy, but it was called Living with Others. If that's not about empathy, I don't know what is. I mean, but it wasn't titled empathy. It was really, so the person who ran the series brought in people from, lots of different areas, and some of them were more related to empathy than others, but what a great series that would be. I need to talk to that guy who's in charge of that series and say, hey, let's just have one about, we call it empathy, and we'll just see what happens. But I don't know. It would be such a fascinating thing to talk about with all those different people. Just try and bring in people from everywhere and see what they say about it. I mean, that's what you're doing, which I think is really good.
Well, so this is can be kind of like the stepping stone towards that.
Yeah.
We can actually do it online. We can have some.
That's right.
I just finished a panel discussion. There was 4 or 5 of us in the panel, so we can actually kind of start a whole online series and kind of explore kind of the nuances of empathy and bring these different traditions together: the biologists, the artists, the psychologists, the you name it,
absolutely,
the dishwasher, everyone.
Yeah, you could have Desmond Tutu on there. I think about the truth and reconciliation. Empathy's got to be at the core of how that was conceived of and how it works. And the only way that thing can work, I think, is if people on both sides can see the other side. It's like the mediation you're talking about. I mean, it's such an important thing. There's so many different ways to get at it.
Yeah, just regarding the truth and reconciliation, there's the whole restorative justice community.
Yeah.
And in the conference, I have a subsection just on that, and there's probably about 7 or 8 interviews, 9 interviews of people just talking about the role of empathy within the whole justice community and how to transform the justice system from being a punitive, retribution, competitive-based model to a connecting and empathic connection kind of a model.
It's so powerful. I'm definitely going to look at all those. I'm trying to watch as many as I can because it's such a powerful thing, and I think it's people really, this is talking outside of my area, you know more about than I do, but it just seems like so many people see conflict as only in one way, and that is a very competitive, you win, I lose way. And empathy is the way to, I think, to get them to see it, that we can both win. I mean, why can't we both win? But in one of my classes, I talk about that competition and cooperation, and I play this game with my students, and it's so hard for them to get out of that competitive mindset. But I think if we can, we're all going to be better off. But I think that's almost as difficult to convince people of as it is to convince them that empathy is in their own interest, or they can do it and it's going to be beneficial for them. But so we've unfortunately chosen, you've chosen, I've chosen a tough road to hoe, I think. But
well, I'll tell you, yeah, this is I'm just so excited to have kind of connected, because I feel a resonance with kind of the way you're looking at this, and kind of your enthusiasm for it, and kind of your open-mindedness and wanting to kind of explore it. So I think this is just the beginning, because of this technology. It's so easy to have these conversations, to bring others in, and like one project I like to do is like create a curriculum. So how can we get a group of people together who are really interested in this, and create like an online curriculum that really goes systematically and ties in all these different traditions, these different fields. Since you're in academia, there's a group at Arizona State who is they're social workers and creating curriculum for social workers, and they've come to the conclusion that that empathy has kind of been ignored in the whole social work research, and that it's really the core, and that they need to create a new curriculum for social workers that's like based in empathy. So and there's a group of maybe 4 of them, and they've written some really great articles, and I've interviewed one of the people from there. So that's the whole social work department, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then there's a Professor Nadine Dolby, who's at Purdue, and she's in the curriculum department there for multicultural education. And multicultural education has been a lot about, privilege, white privilege, and kind of all this kind of stuff. And she's saying we have to redefine the whole multicultural education and found it on empathy. So she just wrote a book about that. So you're seeing, this is really exciting to me, because I'm seeing this in you in the psychology, multicultural social workers, that, if we can kind of get together and create this kind of unified value of empathy, and from all these different traditions, and bring all these skills and insights and perspectives together, that I think we can really, accomplish a lot.
I mean, I was going to say we need a conference, but boy, this
is it. We're doing it. This is the conference right here. And so I'm ready, if you have some topics you'd like to cover, in panel discussion, more of these discussions, bring some of these people together. So let's just keep the conversation going.
It'd be great. I'd love to do it.
Okay. Well, great. I'm so thrilled. We not only have we talked about all this, but we've got some empathic action kind of happening.
Yes, let's do it. Absolutely. So, I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, me too. So, okay, well, I'm so glad you took the time to share your experiences, and I'll kind of follow up by email on setting some times and dates.
Fantastic. It's been great to meet you. I'm excited about what you're doing, and I'm excited to be part of it as much as I can be.
Okay, then talk to you shortly.
Okay, while. Thanks, Edwin.
Okay, goodbye, Matthew.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.